Chapter 27. Alright then, we'll set off in 2 days. Make some preparations in the next few days. As for your errand work, I'll have the school temporarily hand it over to the 3 of them. You don't have to worry about it. Seeing that Han Shuo had agreed, Fanny smiled charmingly. Her beautiful face was even more enchanting because of her smile, causing Han Shuo's heart to flutter slightly. Before he had been placed in Brian's body, Han Shuo's life could be said to be a failure. Not only had he achieved nothing in his career, but his love life was even worse. He still didn't know what it was like to be a woman. After coming to this world, Han Shuo's self-control had become weaker and weaker due to his cultivation of demonic magic. His various desires had become more and more intense. Han Shuo could be considered a person who had died once. The muddle-headed life in the past had completely bound him. In addition to that, because of his family and personality, although he had some evil thoughts, he didn't dare to have any extravagant hopes. Now that he had arrived in this completely unfamiliar world, after cultivating demonic magic, and following the gradual increase in his strength, many of the powers that had previously restrained him had also disappeared. He naturally wanted to have no regrets and realize the extravagant hope that had been buried in his heart all this time. Women, especially beautiful women, were one of the desires that Han Shuo couldn't restrain in his heart. Not only was Fanny beautiful and alluring, she also took good care of Han Shuo. Han Shuo was at the age where he longed for women the most, so it was inevitable that he would have strong desires. In addition to that, the cultivation of demonic magic was about following one's heart's desires, so Han Shuo naturally treated Fanny as his emotional prey. Master Fanny, are the dark creatures you summon different every time? Can you summon the dark creature and send it back to the other dimension so that you can summon the original one the next time? Since Han Shuo had promised Fanny that he would go out with them, he began to make plans for his own matters. Han Shuo didn't have anything on him other than the little skull that he had summoned. Within a certain range, Han Shuo could use his mental strength to contact the little skull. However, if they were to go far away and were thousands of miles away, it would be difficult for Han Shuo to contact the little skull with his mental strength. If Han Shuo wasn't here and Han Shuo wasn't there to control the little skull, it would be troublesome if something happened. Although Han Shuo was confident that he could send the little skull to the other dimension, he still didn't know if he could summon it again. Therefore, Han Shuo wanted to solve this problem before he left. As a teacher of the necromancy major, Fanny was naturally more familiar with these matters. Just because Han Shuo didn't have a way didn't mean that Fanny didn't have one. Therefore, yes. When Han Shuo's words left his mouth, Fanny looked at Han Shuo with a bit of confusion. Her sexy, full lips moved as she asked, Brian, why are you asking this? These things should be the necromancy major's concern. You shouldn't be interested in these things. Oh, that's Lisa's question. I'm just asking you on her behalf. Han Shuo nodded and said with a face of good intentions. Fanny didn't doubt Han Shuo's response. She understood that Lisa often used Han Shuo to practice her necromancy magic, so it made sense that Lisa would ask Han Shuo. After thinking for a bit, Fanny said, So that's how it is. It's not that you can't summon the same dark creature again after sending it to the other dimension, but that there's no need to do so. Every time you summon it from the other dimension, you can only randomly summon one or more dark creatures of the same level based on the strength of your mental strength and the strength of the incantation. Because dark creatures of the same level aren't that different in strength, no one cares about this. Then what should we do if we want to summon the dark creature that was previously sent to the other dimension? A thought occurred to Han Shuo and he hastily asked. Putting away all the magic scrolls on the table, Fanny's beautiful and slender fingers slid lightly over the table. She frowned and explained, If we really want to summon the dark creature that was sent to the other dimension, then we must leave a magical brand on its body before sending it to the other dimension. The next time we summon it, we can use the brand to lock onto the original dark creature. This way, we can find and summon the dark creature that was originally sent to the other dimension. Han Shuo was overjoyed when he heard Fanny's words, but he frowned and murmured to himself, So that's how it is. I wonder if Lisa knows how to leave a magical brand on a summoned dark creature. Looking at Han Shuo in surprise, Fanny grinned and said softly, Brian, you're a very kind person. I know that Lisa has never been very friendly to you, and that the problems with your body were caused by the agony of the soul. To think that not only did you not hold a grudge, but you've always been considerate of her. There are very few people as pure and kind as you these days. Pure. Han Shuo was speechless inside, but he put on an honest smile and scratched his head, saying a bit embarrassedly, I feel that you can't hold a grudge for anything. As long as you treat others with kindness, they'll understand. Fanny smiled lightly and nodded when she heard Han Shuo's words, but didn't say anything else. She took out a thin yellow piece of paper from a nearby cabinet and picked up a feather with her slender fingers. She dipped it in ink and quickly wrote something on the thin paper. Fanny had filled the paper with words after a while and inserted the feather into the pen holder. She handed the paper to Han Shuo and smiled. This is the incantation and method to leave a magical brand on a summoned dark creature. Give it to Lisa. I think that with her strength as a novice mage, she should know how to do it. Overjoyed, Han Shuo almost trembled as he accepted Fanny's thin paper. He smiled and nodded, saying impatiently, I'll go now, Lisa will be very happy. Han Shuo took the thin paper excitedly and quickly left Fanny's laboratory after he'd spoken. What a pure and innocent young fellow. I hope that Lisa will make less trouble for him in the future with this. Fanny smiled faintly and said ruefully when she saw Han Shuo leave in a hurry. Deep into the night, in the cemetery behind the Babylon Academy of Magic and Force. O endless darkness, transform into the bone arrow of destruction. With my will, destroy everything before me, bone arrow. A low magical incantation sounded and a sharp bone arrow instantly formed in the air. It whistled fiercely as it abruptly pierced into the chest of a scarecrow in front of it. Haha, I can finally successfully release the bone arrow. Han Shuo laughed loudly and said proudly when he saw that the bone arrow hadn't shattered midway and hadn't gone the wrong way this time. It had been a long time since the incident that had occurred in the cemetery, and Han Shuo was certain that no one would pay attention to this place again when he'd returned to the cemetery and started practicing the bone arrow. Han Shuo's mental strength had increased rapidly in this period of time, especially after he'd played with that strange ball last time. Han Shuo's mental strength had greatly increased after he'd escaped death. After continuous practice and understanding of magical knowledge, Han Shuo could finally completely grasp this low-level necromancy spell, bone arrow, without the slightest error. The little skull stood ramrod straight in the distance, its empty eye sockets continuously patrolling the surroundings as it moved its head. The bone dagger in his hand was gripped within the 5 bones of his right hand, sparkling with a cold, eerie light under the moonlight. Tomorrow he would temporarily leave the Babylon Academy of Magic and Force with Brahma and the others and head to the outside world. The fact that Han Shuo had used Lisa's name to ask Fanny for advice wasn't exposed. This was a small matter after all, and Fanny wasn't someone who would ask about everything. She'd naturally forget about it after a day or two. Han Shuo had consulted the foundations of necromancy and an overview of dark creatures over the past few days. He'd carefully studied and pondered over the contents of Fanny's thin paper, and was now confident that he could leave a magical brand on the little skull's body. Before he left the next day, Han Shuo finally decided to make his move. He began to plant his own magical brand on the little skull according to his own understanding. His mental strength stirred, and the patrolling little skull swiftly dashed towards Han Shuo with the bone dagger in its hand. The 7 bone spurs on the little skull's back flapped slightly as the little skull ran, as if giving it some assistance. This caused the little skull's figure to seem to be skimming through the air as it ran, giving Han Shuo quite a fright. He thought to himself that his efforts in refining the little skull hadn't gone to waste. This little skull's strength was obviously increasing bit by bit, just like him. When the little skull came to a stop in front of Han Shuo held his breath and focused his mental strength like never before. He curled his fingers and raised them slightly towards the sky, starting to chant the incantation in a low voice according to Fanny's notes. My loyal servant, in the capacity of a summoned host, I leave my eternal brand on you, the seal of darkness. As soon as the incantation ended, Han Shuo suddenly felt his mental strength rapidly drain away. A dark, fist-sized ball of air quickly formed between his curled hands. The amount of mental strength required for the Seal of Darkness was beyond Han Shuo's expectations. It was only at this moment that Han Shuo remembered something he'd neglected. Lisa was a novice mage, and he was just a magic apprentice. The amount of mental strength Fanny's method required was probably based on Lisa's mental strength. She'd never thought that the target of the spell would be a magic apprentice like Han Shuo. With his mental strength drained in an instant, Han Shuo felt a sharp pain in his mind, as if something had been extracted as well. He couldn't help but be shocked. Just at this moment, the ball of air between Han Shuo's hands suddenly floated out and entered the little skull's body through its empty eye sockets. At the same time, Han Shuo felt his entire body collapse as he fell to the ground on his butt, panting heavily. Suddenly, the hazy memories from Chu Kanglan seemed to have been torn apart, and a portion of the incantation and memory suddenly became extremely clear. It was the memory of controlling demonic treasures and the method of magic control. The sudden clarity of the memory made Han Shuo understand that in this baffling situation, he'd learned a bit more of the hazy memories of Chu Kanglan in his mind. A strange whooshing sound abruptly interrupted Han Shuo's thoughts. Han Shuo couldn't help but raise his head to search for the source of the sound. When he turned his head to look, Han Shuo was dumbfounded. All he saw was that the little skull's body was dancing wildly, as a sharp bone dagger glinted coldly under the moonlight. It circled around the little skull's body, and as the little skull's fingers moved, the bone dagger changed directions bizarrely, riddling the grass dolls that Han Shuo had made with holes. Han Shuo recovered from his shock, and his face was filled with uncontrollable ecstasy. He shouted to the sky, F***ck me, this is F***king amazing. Chapter 28. A streak of white light flashed past as Han Shuo and a group of necromancy students appeared out of thin air within a circular magic matrix filled with magical symbols. Han Shuo had experimented 3 times last night and discovered that he could really send the little skull to the other dimension and then recall it. He happily returned to his room and put away the money pouch hidden under his bed, making preparations for his training outside. Han Shuo's face was full of astonishment as his eyes spun continuously, carefully examining the magic matrix that he was in. The entire matrix was circular in shape, and there was an enormous hexagram on the rock beneath his feet. Exquisite magical patterns were carved on the magical pillars at the edges, and faint magical pulses emanated from the entire matrix. Han Shuo had been at the Babylon Academy of Magic and Force a moment ago, and had stood in a similar transportation matrix. Han Shuo felt a strong magical pulse fill his surroundings when the matrix was activated, and then he appeared here after a flash of white light. Han Shuo understood from the student's words that this was a magical transportation matrix. This kind of magical transportation matrix was very valuable, and it was quite complicated to set up. Even a skilled mage would need a large amount of magical materials to set up a magical transportation matrix. Stop looking, the magical transportation matrix is indeed wondrous, but there's no need to make such a big fuss out of nothing. Lisa couldn't help but speak up when she saw Han Shuo looking around foolishly. This magic was truly magical. Although Han Shuo had heard of magical transportation matrices before, this was his first time experiencing one and naturally felt that it was a bit incredible. Han Shuo finally gave up after carefully examining the surroundings of the matrix. Han Shuo understood that with his current superficial knowledge of magic, he wouldn't be able to understand even if he were to explain the principles behind a magical matrix, much less set up a transportation matrix. Not to mention that the amount of magical materials needed to set up a transportation matrix was enormous. Even the Empire couldn't set it up in every city, and the amount of energy required to operate the matrix was considerable. Even some regular nobles wouldn't be able to afford it. If it wasn't for the fact that the Babylon Academy of Magic and Force possessed a magical transportation matrix, Han Shuo would likely never be able to use a magical transportation matrix even once in his lifetime. This was the city of Zhajoski at the border of the Lancelot Empire. Zajosky was the largest city in the southwest of the empire. West of Zajosky was the Kurlan Valley. West of the Kurlan Valley was where the orcs lived. To the south of Zajosky was the Dark Forest. All sorts of powerful magical creatures lived within the vast dark forest, including elves who worshipped nature. Zajosky had never been peaceful. The Empire had invested many troops in Zajosky to defend against the barbaric orcs' invasion. It was said that the lands that the orcs lived in were extremely barren. The barbaric orcs had always wanted to occupy the fertile lands of the Lancelot Empire. Zajosky was the Empire's largest defense point in the southwest, and would naturally receive the care of the orcs. The Dark Forest wasn't a peaceful place either. Although the elves, who worshipped peace and nature, were on relatively good terms with the Empire, the magical creatures within the Dark Forest would often walk out of the forest and appear in nearby villages. This caused some of the surrounding villages to be quite disturbed. Perhaps it was because Zajosky wasn't peaceful that the Empire had expended a great deal of money to build a magical transportation matrix within the city in order to facilitate communication between the Empire and Zajosky. However, the magical transportation matrix consumed too much energy to use, and the number of people that could be transported was limited. Therefore, it couldn't support large-scale military deployments at all. Zajosky's unique location made it a haven for adventurers. All sorts of merchants and adventurers desired to come here and make a fortune. The magical creatures' cores, bones, skin, and flesh within the Dark Forest, the priceless magical equipment forged by the elves, the precious gems produced by the barren orcs, and many other items that could bring in great profits were the targets of these gold seekers. Honored mages, welcome to the city of Zajosky. I hope you will enjoy your stay in Zajosky and obtain what you need. An official in charge of managing the magical matrix bowed humbly to Han Shuo and the others. Thank you for your kind words. I think we'll be able to reap the rewards we deserve. Fanny nodded at him with a smile and then looked at the necromancy students. She said softly, "This isn't a peaceful place. Everyone be careful and don't make any mistakes. Let's go." Fanny led the way down the main street after she'd spoken. These students were just like Han Shuo, looking around curiously, sizing up the people and things around them. Including the two teachers, Fanny and Jean, as well as the 9 necromancy students and Han Shuo, there were only 12 people in total. Fanny and Jean were both adept necromancers. Fitch hadn't come with them this time because he was advancing to adept mage. The strength of the 9 necromancy students varied. Apart from a journeyman mage called Derek, the rest were all novice mages and apprentices. Some of the buildings along the street were made from hard rocks. Compared to some of the buildings within the Empire, they lacked some of their artistic beauty, but had a few more traces of solemnity and toughness. Because Zajosky often faced attacks from orcs, not only were the walls built to be incredibly sturdy, but even the buildings within the city were built to be sturdy. Along the way, Han Shuo noticed that there were many weapon stores, potion stores, magical item stores, food stores, small taverns for entertainment, slave auctions, and all sorts of trading places. It looked like because of the special geography, the merchants all knew what kind of business was the most profitable. In and out of these places were warriors, knights, mages of different majors, thieves, archers, merchants, poets, and even some slender, sharp-eared, handsome elves who were obviously from the Dark Forest. The cries of vendors on the street, the low, melodious recitations of poets, the neighing of knights and warhorses, and the sounds of armed combat rose and fell. These scenes completely exceeded Han Shuo's imagination, causing Han Shuo to feel extremely amazed. He also gained a clearer understanding of this chaotic city. There's nothing much to see. We need to leave the city before it gets dark. This isn't a place we should linger in for long. Our next destination is the town of Droll. If we don't get there before dark, we'll have to sleep in the wilderness tonight. Jean called out loudly, urging the students to walk faster. Heh, they're all flowers in a greenhouse. This may be the first time some of them have come to Zajosky City. No wonder they're so curious. They won't be so surprised after they get used to it. Fanny's bright eyes swept over the crowd, and she couldn't help but laugh lightly when she saw that these people were all in high spirits. "Brian, you're carrying so many things, are you all right?" Lisa, who was next to Han Shuo, frowned as she looked at Han Shuo and asked aloud. "Elisa, when did you start caring so much about Brian? This isn't like you." Novice Mage Bella looked at Lisa with a bit of astonishment and said oddly. Apart from being responsible for miscellaneous chores, Han Shuo had also taken on the heavy responsibility of hard labor when he came with them. Although there were miraculous space rings that could store items in this world, they were very expensive. Even ordinary nobles would find it difficult to obtain one, not to mention commoners. None of the necromancy teachers and students had been fortunate enough to obtain a space ring. Everyone had brought quite a bit of stuff with them on this trip. As an errand slave, Han Shuo naturally took on the responsibility of carrying the load. Many items were tied to Han Shuo's back, shoulders, wrists, and even his legs. In the beginning, these people hadn't thought that Han Shuo would be able to carry so many things, but when they realized that Han Shuo was still able to walk easily after putting so many items on Han Shuo's body, they were surprised to put even more items on Han Shuo's body. Although Han Shuo could feign ignorance and bear less, in order to train his body, Han Shuo didn't do anything and instead gladly accepted. Han Shuo's body was now covered with all sorts of items, and even a few pockets hung around his neck, only revealing a face covered in dust. "Oh, I'm fine." Han Shuo smiled faintly at Lisa and said lightly. Ever since Han Shuo's sincere and affectionate confession to Lisa in the trap, Lisa's attitude towards Han Shuo had changed greatly. Her words had already begun to defend Han Shuo. Lisa snorted lightly when she saw that Han Shuo didn't appreciate her good intentions and spoke in such a manner. She muttered to herself, "He doesn't know what's good for him. What an idiot. This is all thanks to you. If it wasn't for your agony of the soul, Brian wouldn't have been so crazy." But it's strange that Brian seems to have grown taller and stronger since then. His stamina is so good now as well. "Lisa, you're really something." Bella exclaimed softly and said eccentrically, "Bella, it's none of your business. Who asked you to speak out of turn?" Lisa flicked a glance at Bella and said coldly, "Who cares about your business? I'm just curious." Bella snorted and responded to Lisa, All right. Behave yourselves and hurry out of the city. If we don't reach Droll before nightfall, your delicate bodies will suffer." Fanny frowned and reprimanded softly. She then looked at Han Shuo and said gently, "Brian, are you really all right?" Nodding, Han Shuo smiled faintly and said with certainty, "I'm fine. My stamina will naturally come back when I eat well." Fanny grinned daintily when she heard Han Shuo's words and said, "It looks like my request to the school to improve your meals has really worked." The group didn't waste any more words after that, and the students didn't continue to look around either. They all hurried towards the city gates. Chapter 29. When Han Shuo's group of 12 arrived at the city gates, they were stunned by the grandeur of Zajowski's city gates. The entire city gates were abnormally vast, built entirely from the sturdiest of rocks. Perhaps it was because the rocks had been stained with too much blood, but the color seemed to have been sprayed with blood into a deep brown. The city walls were dozens of meters tall, and were densely packed with powerful soldiers clad in armor and wielding sharp weapons. All sorts of defensive measures could be seen on the city walls. From afar, the city gates looked like the bloody maw of an enormous magical creature that had bared its fangs and swallowed everything in its path. Sharp, cold barbs, like the sharp teeth of the magical creature's mouth, filled every corner of the city walls. The cold light on the barbs sparkled brilliantly under the sunlight, giving off a fierce, intimidating aura. The two enormous black doors, forged from an unknown material, had already been opened. The city gates were incomparably wide, enough for 10 or so people to ride through on horseback side by side. It was quite crowded in front of the gates. Enormous, strange magical creatures with all sorts of materials and people on their backs slowly passed through the gates and made their way out of the city. These magical creatures were enormous, larger than any beast Han Shuo had ever seen. They were 5 meters tall and more than 10 meters long. Their skin was a deep brown and their heads were a bit similar to an elephant's. There were many wrinkles on their faces, and 2 long, curved, pure white teeth protruded from their cheeks. Just the teeth alone were a meter long. This is an earth dragon, a rather docile magical creature. Earth dragons are easily tamed and are slow, but they can carry heavy objects. They are the Empire's primary means of transportation. Merchants use earth dragons to transport heavy objects and conduct trade in various places. Fanny couldn't help but smile as she explained when she saw many students looking at the earth dragons in amazement. "Master Fanny, look after them. I'll go register with the officers and borrow a few warhorses. Otherwise, we won't be able to make it to Droll before nightfall on foot." Jean's eyes glittered as he looked at Fanny, and he spoke with a smile. His gaze rested on Fanny's beautiful face and didn't move away for even a moment. Everyone in the necromancy major knew of Jean's feelings for Fanny, and Fanny herself was even more aware of it. However, she had never expressed anything about it. Jean wasn't in a hurry either. He seemed to have the idea of using sincerity to move Fanny. He often found opportunities to express his love, and long periods of intense gazing was one of them. Han Shuo couldn't help but curse inwardly when he saw Jean's undisguised gaze. In Han Shuo's heart, Fanny had long since become his personal property. Someone else was peeking at Fanny in front of him, so he was naturally displeased. However, he was just an odd-job worker now, and his strength wasn't strong enough to display. So, although he was unhappy, he couldn't do anything about it. Go ahead. I'll keep a good eye on them." Fanny was unruffled as she agreed with a light smile. She avoided Jean's fiery gaze and turned her head to look at the magnificent city walls. She sighed with emotion. "Although I've seen it many times, I feel proud of the Zajoski city gates every time I come back. It's because of the existence of the sturdy Zajoski city gates that the savage orcs have repeatedly returned without achieving anything." Han Shuo was carrying all sorts of items on his back, and his body was almost completely submerged in them. Han Shuo didn't completely stop after everyone had stopped. He bent his legs and stood up straight, his wrists moving up and down as he repeated the boring movements. "Brian, what are you doing?" Amy stood next to Han Shuo and couldn't help but look at Han Shuo in surprise when she saw the piles of items swaying continuously on Han Shuo's body. The others also noticed Han Shuo's movements after Amy's words and also focused their attention on Han Shuo, all of their faces revealing puzzled expressions. "Nothing, my body's a bit sore. I'll feel better if I move a bit." Han Shuo said faintly, his expression simple and honest. He really did look a bit foolish. "Idiot, be careful. The things you're carrying are all very valuable. If you accidentally break them, you won't be able to pay for it even if you sell yourself." Bella frowned and said coldly, "Bella, you're such an idiot. Those things are very sturdy. How could they be broken so easily? No one made him carry anything that was truly precious and easily broken." Lisa cast a disdainful glance at Bella and said sarcastically, "Don't keep arguing, the two of you. You'll encounter some dangers, big or small, every time you go out for training. You should be united, or else there will be problems along the way." Fanny couldn't help but frown when she saw that Lisa and Bella had started arguing again. Han Shuo completely ignored Bella's cold words and continued to repeat the boring movements. These movements weren't left behind from Chu Kanglin's magical yuan, but were muscle training methods that Han Shuo had seen in the past. In order to continuously improve himself and surpass the solid realm, Han Shuo was making the most of his time to train his body. Jean returned empty-handed with an ugly expression after a while. He said angrily when he arrived next to Fanny, "Damn it, they're asking us for money." Fanny frowned when she heard these words and said in surprise, "Our Babylon Academy of Magic and Force is the cradle of the Empire's knights, warriors, and mages. We nurture so many talents for the Empire every year. Even many of the officers and mages stationed in Zajoski are from our Babylon Academy of Magic and Force. The Academy has an agreement with Zajoski. How would they dare not lend us their warhorses?" When I said that I was from the Babylon Academy of Magic and Force, that officer planned on lending us warhorses. When I took out my proof and saw that we were from the Necromancy Major, he actually began to mock and ridicule us. He started demanding 50 gold coins from me, saying that he wouldn't lend us the warhorses if we didn't pay up. He also said that our necromancy major hasn't produced any talents for the Empire and that we shouldn't enjoy free treatment. Jean was seething with anger as he spoke. When the students heard his words, they all felt the same hatred for the enemy. They all yelled out angrily, wanting to settle the score with the officer. It looked like the feeling of being looked down upon was quite unpleasant indeed. These students had already felt a bit wronged when they'd entered the declining necromancy major. It was naturally difficult to suppress the anger in their hearts now that they were being ignored. Forget it, take out 50 gold coins from our funds and give it to him. These officers have lived here for a long time. Add to that the fact that our necromancy major has indeed declined and our status in the academy is low. It's inevitable that they'll look down on us. I'll report this matter to the dean when I return to the academy. Let's not argue with them for now. Fanny shook her head and spoke a few words of advice with a face full of dejection before speaking to Jean. Jean first disagreed after Fanny's words, saying that they couldn't condone the arrogance of these arrogant soldiers. But after Fanny tactfully spoke a few words of advice, he finally shook his head and sighed lowly. He dejectedly took the 50 gold coins from Fanny's hands and walked towards the corner of the city gates. Han Shuo observed the group and then looked at the dejected Fanny. He couldn't help but focus his gaze on the officer in the distance, thinking that there would be a day when the necromancy major would once again regain its former glory in his hands. The name of necromancy would once again strike fear into the hearts of others. Don't be disheartened. No one dared look down on necromancy when it was in its prime. It's just that there was a period of time in the past when necromancy was being squeezed by all the major factions. It's said that there was a great magical war that caused necromancy to suffer heavy casualties. Many shockingly powerful spells were lost, leading to the decline of necromancy. We're exploring the dark forest this time because I've heard that a cemetery of death has been discovered. It's said that the cemetery of death used to be the place where a magus with profound knowledge of necromancy had stayed many years ago. If we can find that cemetery of death and obtain the books on necromancy within, we may be able to change the current situation of our necromancy major. Fanny couldn't help but speak words of comfort when she saw that the students were also dejected. Everyone's expressions shook when they heard Fanny's words. Expressions of joy and surprise appeared on their faces. It looked like they were all prepared to face this time's training properly. Fanny sighed involuntarily in her heart when she saw that everyone was incomparably excited. Although there had been news that the cemetery of death had been discovered, the person who discovered it had died not long after walking out of the cemetery. The dark forest was vast, and wanting to find the cemetery of death within it was undoubtedly like searching for a needle in a haystack. Even she herself didn't hold any hope. Not to mention that if such a place had really been discovered, many adventurers would swarm in. When that time came, it would be too unrealistic for the 12 of them to obtain what they needed from the cemetery of death with their strength alone. Fanny was only saying these words to comfort everyone. The main goal this time was to test the students' necromancy magic and help them comprehend magical knowledge in the outside world. Aren't these the necromancy major? Are you also going on an adventure? Why are you all standing here? Just as the necromancy major students were thinking, a delicate voice sounded from afar. They saw the light major student Irene, who they'd seen last time, along with a few other light major teachers and students, as well as the knight Claude, who'd been pursuing her bitterly, gallop over from afar on a tall warhorse. None of your business, be careful not to fall off your horse. Lisa looked disdainfully at Irene and cursed coldly. You must have not borrowed a warhorse yet. No wonder. Your necromancy major hasn't made any contributions to the Empire at all. Of course it's a bit inappropriate to want to use the Empire's resources for free, Irene giggled, her pure and holy face full of ridicule and ridicule. Although Lisa and the others were angry, what Lisa said was the truth. They could only grit their teeth and sulk, but couldn't find the words to refute. Hello, Master Fanny. The light major adept mage Beecher smiled at Fanny from atop his warhorse. You and Beecher, are you also going on an adventure in the dark forest? Fanny returned the greeting with a smile and said faintly, Yes, We plan to go to the dark forest and help the nearby villages kill the magical creatures that often cause trouble. We'll share some of the burden with the Empire and also take the opportunity to train the students' ability to use magic. Haha, we'll be leaving first. We'll meet again if we have the chance. Beecher spoke courteously, but Han Shuo could detect a trace of disdain in his eyes. It was as if he was looking down on his group. Jean finally walked over with 6 warhorses after Beecher and the others from the Light Major had whizzed past on their tall steeds. These warhorses were obviously inferior to the ones the Light Major students had just used, whether in physical strength or numbers. It looked like even if they'd spent an extra 50 gold coins, the Necromancy Major still wouldn't be able to receive equal treatment. But the Necromancy Major had 12 people, but only 6 warhorses. This meant that 2 people would have to share a horse. The students looked at each other and quickly found someone to share a horse with. Only Han Shuo, Fanny, Jean, and Bach hadn't found someone to share a horse with. Bach, you and Brian can share a horse. I'll share a horse with Master Fanny. Jean's eyes spun and his face lit up with delight as he spoke to Bach merrily. No, I absolutely won't share a horse with this dirty errand slave. Bach had a grudge against Han Shuo and immediately cried out in discontent. Everyone knew of Jean's intentions. Now was a good opportunity to get closer to Fanny. He was about to speak angrily when he heard Bach's cry when Fanny suddenly smiled and said, "Since Bach isn't willing, then Brian can share a horse with me." Haha, many thanks Master Fanny, I'm coming. Han Shuo was overjoyed and happily walked past Jean, walking quickly towards Fanny. Chapter 30. On the way to the town of Droll, the many items that Han Shuo had previously carried on him were taken off and distributed to the other warhorses. Han Shuo sat behind Fanny, and as they moved up and down, Han Shuo and Fanny's dainty body would occasionally come into contact. A faint, delicate fragrance wafted into Han Shuo's nose and mouth as Fanny's black hair swayed. Fanny sat on the warhorse, her voluptuous waist ramrod straight. Han Shuo could see the enchanting curves of her back beneath her mage robes. As the warhorse continued to gallop, the 2 of them, who had originally been a bit apart, gradually came closer. Eventually, Han Shuo's lower abdomen and Fanny's full, round bottom slowly came into contact. As the warhorse galloped at high speed, the 2 of them weren't steady. Han Shuo's lower abdomen was pressed against Fanny's beautiful bottom, and the thin mage robe was unable to obstruct the feeling of ecstasy and beauty. As his lower abdomen and Fanny's full bottom came into contact, Han Shuo couldn't help but develop a strong masculine characteristic. When Han Shuo's lower body straightened, Han Shuo didn't know whether to laugh or cry. However, the sensations of his body weren't something that he could control at all. His erect lower body continuously moved against Fanny's beautiful bottom as the warhorse moved up and down. Wave after wave of intense stimulation came from the point where Han Shuo and Fanny's full bottom came into contact, causing Han Shuo's heart to stir so much that he almost cried out. Han Shuo gazed at Fanny from behind and discovered that at some point, Fanny's pure white neck had already been dyed red, making her look even more tender and alluring. The beautiful Fanny had always been the object of Han Shuo's fantasies. Han Shuo's body was at the age when it was the most difficult for a man to control his impulses. Add to that the fact that Han Shuo was a virgin who didn't know what a woman felt like. The intensity of this stimulation was undoubtedly as violent as lightning striking the earth and fire. It became difficult to control in an instant. It was difficult to control his lustful thoughts once they started, and Han Shuo's lustful hands trembled as he slowly reached out to touch Fanny's soft waist. His 2 hands grabbed onto Fanny's waist, making their lower bodies even more closely connected. 2 waves of bone-piercing pain instantly came from the back of Han Shuo's hands. When he raised his head in shock, Han Shuo immediately saw Fanny's ashamed and angry face. After turning his head, Fanny's dainty face was bright red as she glared hatefully at Han Shuo. She growled lowly, "Damn it, control yourself, Brian, or I'll throw you off the horse." But immediately after, Fanny saw that something was wrong with Han Shuo. Han Shuo's face was flushed red, his body convulsing, and he panted heavily. This state lasted for 5 seconds before Han Shua's entire body suddenly froze and stopped moving. His body returned to normal, and only his mouth was still panting intermittently. Fanny could clearly feel that there was something wet and slippery in the cleft of her buttocks. "I'm sorry, Master Fanny, I didn't do it on purpose." Seeing that Fanny looked like she was about to go berserk, Han Shua immediately reacted after venting and mumbled guiltily. However, in his heart, Han Shua continuously savored the ecstasy of venting and wasn't as scared or guilty as he appeared on the surface. Fanny was exasperated. She now understood that at Han Shua's age and that it was indeed inappropriate for the two of them to have physical contact. Han Shua's actions were all instinctive and probably not his original intention. However, Han Shua's actions had actually violated her. Although the two of them hadn't really done anything, as a woman, Fanny was naturally quite aggrieved and angry to have Han Shua venting on her back like this. As an adept mage, if Fanny were to make a move out of humiliation, Han Shua might really not be able to handle it. Add to that the fact that Han Shua still had a good impression of Fanny, and he was truly afraid that Fanny would throw caution to the wind and make a move. Seeing her like this, he really didn't know what to do, and his heart was a bit unsettled for a moment. Just as Han Shua was letting his imagination run wild, he suddenly felt the inner skin of his thighs pinched fiercely. He immediately let out a low scream and heard Fanny's voice in his ear at the same time. "Damned Brian, I'll deal with you later." "Master Fanny, what's going on? Brian, what are you screaming about?" Lisa, who was in front, couldn't help but turn her head to ask when she heard Han Shua's scream. "No, nothing, he didn't sit properly just now and made a fuss out of fright." Before Brian could speak, Fanny had already rushed to explain. After a moment of silence, the group continued on their way. Half an hour later, Han Shua discovered to his surprise that his lower body was once again erect. When Fanny felt the same, she immediately dropped a distance and reined in the horse, angrily demanding that Han Shua steer the horse. "Master Fanny, I really didn't do it on purpose, and I don't know how to ride a horse." Under Fanny's angry urging, Han Shua helplessly rode on the horse and said with an aggrieved expression, "Shut up and listen to me. I'll teach you how to steer the horse." The two had now switched positions, with Han Shua in front and Fanny in the back. Because of what had happened earlier, Fanny, who had always been gentle and graceful towards Han Shua, no longer had a good temper towards Han Shua and said hatefully. In the beginning, under Fanny's directions, Han Shua couldn't grasp the essentials. The horse continuously pranced, but it didn't know which direction to go and ran wildly in all directions. During this process, the horse constantly neighed and twisted. Han Shua and Fanny's bodies were unsteady, causing Fanny's towering breasts to repeatedly bump into Han Shua's back. Han Shua's mind was like a capricious caper, and he was even more unable to focus on steering the horse. After a while of this, Han Shua finally gradually learned how to steer the horse under Fanny's furious cries. Fanny's two hands propped up on Han Shua's back to prevent her full breasts from touching Han Shua's back intimately. She directed Han Shua to determine the direction and make a beeline for the town of Droll. By the time Han Shua and Fanny arrived at the town of Droll, the sky had already darkened and was about to turn dark. Jean and a group of necromancy students were anxiously waiting at the intersection of the street. Jean hurriedly walked out when Han Shua and Fanny appeared and looked at Fanny, asking urgently, "Master Fanny, why did you guys take so long to arrive? I was worried that something had happened to you. I was so worried." "Nothing much, it's just that Brian wanted to try riding the horse on the way, so I taught him a bit. That's why we were delayed." Fanny had already returned to normal when she arrived here. She looked at everyone with a faint smile and said, "Very good, everyone's here. Master Jean, have you found a hotel?" "It's done. As long as we store the war horses, we can rest. We can set off directly for the dark forest tomorrow morning." Fanny jumped off the horse from behind Han Shua, her body seeming to be quite vigorous. She stretched lazily and Fanny furrowed her brow. "I'm sweaty all over, I'm going to take a shower at the hotel immediately. Brian, after you've stored the warhorse, come to my room at the hotel. I have something to talk to you about." "Understood, Master Fanny." Han Shuo agreed with a wry face. He understood that Fanny was definitely looking for him because of his earlier violation. Han Shuo felt the stickiness of his lower body and immediately understood why Fanny was in such a hurry to take a shower. A trace of a lewd smile hung on his lips. Under Jin's guidance, Han Shuo and the other necromancy students stored the 6 horses and then followed Jin back to the hotel. Master Jin, the town of Droll is far from the empire and directly faces the dark forest. There are many strange shops in the town. Let's go for a walk before it's completely dark. We know the hotel anyways, so we can go back in a bit, alright? Bach suddenly opened his mouth at this moment. The students beside him also had faces full of eagerness and excitement. Judging from their expressions, they seemed to have other motives. Jin vetoed firmly and then looked at the others with an odd smile. He said in a low voice, "Do you think I don't know what you're planning as a teacher?" The town of Droll is also called the town of depravity because of the special circumstances here. The adventurers and merchants who come here face danger at any time, and so they all seek excitement in a drunken stupor. Therefore, the entertainment industry here is renowned throughout the empire. You're absolutely not allowed to take advantage of this opportunity to corrupt me. Indeed, Han Shuo carefully looked around after Jin's words and discovered that the sky wasn't dark yet. The wide streets of the town of Droll were already lit up with neon lights on both sides. At the corners of the road, a few young girls with heavy makeup and revealing clothing smiled coquettishly at the passers-by and threw flirtatious glances at them, giving the impression that they were free to feast on them. Jin's words had obviously revealed their true intentions. When they heard Jin's words, they all walked back to the hotel dejectedly and listlessly, sighing and complaining about Jin's heartlessness. After entering the hotel, the students followed Jin's instructions and found their own rooms. Jin looked at Han Shuo and smiled faintly, saying, "Our funds are limited this time, and we paid another 50 gold coins for the warhorse. In order to simplify things, we've arranged for you to stay in the abandoned storeroom. The storeroom is at the back on the left. If you don't have a key, just go straight." After speaking, Jin spread his hands apologetically towards Han Shuo and swaggered off with a smile. After walking a few steps away, Han Shuo heard Jin's quiet snickering and muttering to himself, "A little errand slave like you can ride the same horse as my beautiful Fanny." The current Han Shuo was no longer the same as before. Within a short distance, Han Shuo's facial features were exceedingly clear and he heard all of Jin's snickering and muttering. He first sneered and cursed lowly, then an evil smile appeared on his face. "When I get my hands on Fanny, I'll see how you cry without tears." Han Shuo thought viciously as he walked directly towards Fanny's room. Chapter 31. Dong Dong Dong. Han Shuo stood outside Fanny's room and stretched out a hand to knock on the door. "Is it Brian? Come in." Fanny's faint and lazy voice sounded from within the room. When Han Shuo pushed open the door and entered, he saw that Fanny's light purple hair was wet and stuck to her pale neck. There were still some sparkling water droplets hanging from her charming face. Fanny had obviously just taken a bath as her body was wrapped in a soft white robe, revealing a small patch of milky white skin on her chest. She held a towel in her jade hands and was currently wiping the water stains from her beautiful hair. The interior of the room was simple, and there was an open bathroom in the back. Wisps of steam were emitted from the steam, and Fanny sat next to a circular table. Her bright blue eyes rippled as they roamed over Han Shuo's body. "Master Fanny, what business do you have with me?" Han Shuo looked around the room and his heart was stirred by Fanny's alluring beauty. However, his expression remained simple and honest, and even a bit timid. "What is it?" You were quite bold on the warhorse today. I've always thought that Brian was a coward, but who would have thought that the things you do when you're lustful are truly impressive?" Fanny sized up Han Shuo, snorted lightly, and said with a frown, "Here it comes." Han Shuo thought to himself as his expression became even more innocent. Han Shuo scratched his head and his face was flushed red from holding back his breath. He then took a deep breath and lowered his head, saying in a low voice, "I'm sorry, Master Fanny. You're so beautiful and you're so close to me. I don't even know what's going on and I can't control my actions at all. I was wrong. Master Fanny, please punish me? Fanny slammed the table with a huff. Han Shuo took 2 steps back in shock and looked at Fanny with a face full of fear and trepidation. Damn it, you violated me, do you know that? Fanny glared fiercely at Han Shuo and shouted in a low voice. Nodding his head honestly, Han Shuo said with an honest face, I was wrong, Master Fanny. I will take responsibility. You will take responsibility? How are you going to be responsible? Can you afford it? When Fanny heard what Han Shuo said, she was so angry that she laughed. She stared at Han Shuo while giggling, but there was no smile on her beautiful face. Then I'll do as you say. I'm at your disposal. Han Shuo was certain that Fanny wouldn't do anything to him. He sighed helplessly and spoke honestly and sincerely. With this, Fanny didn't know how to deal with Han Shuo. In her opinion, Han Shuo really hadn't done it on purpose. Add to that the fact that she was the one who let Han Shuo get on the warhorse, and although that incident had occurred, Han Shuo wasn't guilty of the most heinous crimes. He was just a minor errand slave, so it would be a bit difficult to punish him. Han Shuo's thoughts raced when he saw Fanny's brow furrow slightly. He suddenly opened his mouth and said, Master Fanny, didn't you say that I'm your test subject? I felt that something's not right with my body recently, and there's something strange going on in my head as well. I heard Lisa recite the bone arrow incantation 2 days ago, and when I tried to recite it, I actually managed to cast the bone arrow magic. Fanny was frowning in thought when she heard these words. She immediately looked at Han Shuo with pleasant surprise and said excitedly, Really? Is what you said true? Can you test the bone arrow magic for me? Han Shuo knew that Fanny was obsessed with necromancy magic and was quite curious about the condition of his body. Han Shuo also understood that he couldn't remain an errand slave in the academy forever, so he could make use of this opportunity to slowly change his image in Fanny's eyes. As expected, when Fanny heard of the abnormalities in his body, she immediately forgot about how to deal with him earlier and placed all of her attention on this matter for the time being. Of course. Han Shuo smiled faintly and raised his 2 hands, chanting lowly, Endless darkness, transform into the bone arrow of destruction. With my will, destroy everything in front of me. Bone arrow. When the incantation was completed, a sharp bone arrow suddenly appeared in the air in front of Han Shuo. The bone arrow followed Han Shuo's hand gesture and flew towards the wooden wall on the side. However, the bone arrow first wavered in the air before finally exploding with a pop. No, although the incantation is correct, the hand gesture you used to cast the spell isn't correct at all. When you raise your right hand, you should slowly point it into the air. Your left hand shouldn't be in sync with your right hand. Fanny first gave instructions out of habit, then suddenly reacted and exclaimed in surprise. She looked at Han Shuo with a face full of shock, her body trembling with excitement as she cried out involuntarily, Oh my gosh, you're really able to cast necromancy magic. Yes, I don't know what's going on either. Oh right, Master Fanny, can you explain the correct hand gesture for casting magic to me in detail? Han Shuo laughed inwardly and asked Fanny with a face full of confusion. Of course I can. Fanny was truly excited. She carelessly threw the towel in her hand to the side and moved her slender legs quickly. She arrived at Han Shuo's side and began to explain in detail to Han Shuo. Like this, isn't it like this? Raise your hand a bit higher and focus your mental strength. Don't relax at all. All right, that's the hand gesture. Slow down a bit with your left hand. Cast it again for me to see. Oh, endless darkness, transform into the bone arrow of destruction. With my will, destroy everything in front of me. Bone arrow. Han Shuo recited the incantation and this time, the direction of the bone arrow was completely correct after it appeared. However, when it was about to reach the wooden wall, it suddenly exploded again. Brian, mental strength, pay attention to your mental strength. You can't relax your mental strength at all. You have to wait until the bone arrow is completely successful before you can completely relax. Otherwise, the bone arrow will explode midway. Try again. Oh, endless darkness, transform into the bone arrow of destruction. With my will, destroy everything in front of me. Bone arrow. As soon as the incantation was completed, the bone arrow was as fast as lightning. It didn't change its direction at all and flew straight towards the wooden wall. Poof! The bone arrow pierced through the wooden wall and disappeared without a trace. Oh heavens! Brian, you're a genius, you're definitely a genius in magic. I only guided you twice and you were able to successfully cast this bone arrow spell. Ordinary students would need 1 to 3 months to completely master this spell. You're too incredible. Fanny was completely stupefied by Han Shua's actions. She made a big fuss and gesticulated with joy, looking extremely excited. Damn it, who's randomly casting magic and almost hit me? Brian, Master Fanny, Brian, why are you in Master Fanny's room? Suddenly, Lisa's cry of surprise came from next door. Lisa's eye peeked over from the broken hole, and she cried out in surprise. It's nothing, it's nothing. I'm going to find Brian to practice the bone arrow spell. Lisa, go to bed early, I won't disturb you anymore. Fanny hurried to the broken hole and spoke with a charming smile. She didn't wait for Lisa to speak again and picked up the towel she'd thrown away just now, blocking the hole. Turning to look at Han Shua in surprise, Fanny walked quickly towards Han Shua and said, "Stand there and don't move. Let me take a look at your body and see what's going on." All right. Han Shua smiled and responded faintly. He thought to himself that he'd only spent 10 days or so to completely grasp the bone arrow spell. According to Fanny's words, perhaps he really did have the talent to train in magic. What's that strange smell? Fanny walked to Han Shua's side and was about to take a look at Han Shua's body when her straight nose suddenly wrinkled and she asked in confusion. Han Shua started and then abruptly reacted. He looked awkwardly at his lower body and said with a wry expression, "There's no bathroom in my room and I didn't shower. That's why there's a lingering smell." Fanny's beautiful face flushed red when she heard these words. She glared fiercely at Han Shua and cursed lowly, "Pervert!" She then pointed at the open bathroom in her room and frowned, urging, "The water is still warm, hurry up and wash your filthy thing." It really was pervert. Han Shua could feel that there were still traces of sticky liquid flowing uncontrollably from the seams of his lower body. Fanny's words were exactly what Han Shua wanted. It was indeed uncomfortable to feel sticky down there, so he immediately walked merrily to the bathroom that Fanny had just bathed in. There was a simple and crude ring-shaped pool in the bathroom, and steam rose from the warm water in the pool. There were a few pieces of Fanny's sexy lingerie on the shelf to the side. Han Shua only took a glance at the few silk pieces that were as thin as a cicada's wing and felt a ball of fire suddenly rise from his lower body. Just as Han Shua's fiery gaze was staring blankly at the sexy lingerie Fanny had changed out of, Fanny suddenly rushed in from outside and put away the lingerie with a face full of embarrassment. When she turned around and saw the fiery look in Han Shua's eyes, she couldn't help but spit softly and curse lowly, "Damn it." She viciously pinched Han Shua's back before leaving in a flurry of footsteps. He took off his clothes and lay in the ring-shaped pool, smelling the delicate fragrance that Fanny had left in the bathroom and feeling the water that Fanny had used. Han Shua felt that this moment was indescribably wonderful and he simply didn't want to leave. Han Shua took a long time to take this bath. It wasn't until Fanny urged him several times that he casually washed his underwear and walked out of the bathroom clutching his underwear. "It's getting late, I won't check your body anymore. Hurry up and leave." After Han Shua walked out, Fanny acted as if nothing had happened and pretended to be calm as she spoke faintly. Nodding his head, Han Shua had a silly smile on his face as he happily walked out the door. Just as Han Shua was about to leave, Fanny suddenly called out softly, "Brian." Turning his head to look at Fanny in confusion, Han Shua scratched his head and asked naively, "What's wrong?" "Nothing, it's just that you don't look like a crazy person." Fanny sized up Han Shua and said strangely, "Sometimes I have a headache, I don't know why, but when I'm not stimulated, everything is normal." Han Shua's heart skipped a beat. After answering, he quickly left Fanny's room with a guilty conscience. Chapter 32. Within the warehouse of the hotel, Han Shuo didn't immediately rest, but continued to practice his magical yuan as usual. The magical yuan within his body followed the path of magical yuan circulation, silently circulating through every meridian, skin, flesh, tendons, and bone under the control of Han Shuo's mind. Han Shuo could clearly feel that after such a long period of practice, both his physical strength and sensory abilities had greatly improved. Han Shuo persistently attacked the last bottleneck according to the mantra of the mystical glacial spellfire. The magical yuan flowed to the palms of his hands, repeatedly attempting to clear the bones, tendons, and meridians of his 5 fingers. Pain continuously radiated from the bones, tendons, and meridians of his 5 fingers. Han Shuo's hands spasmed and trembled as 2 faint lights, one red and one purple, radiated from the back of his hands and the center of his palms, like 2 weak lanterns. The pain grew more and more intense as Han Shuo clenched his teeth and held on. He knew that this was a sign that the mystical glacial spellfire had reached a critical stage. Whether or not he could clear all the tendons and meridians in his hands and successfully master the mystical glacial spellfire would depend on whether or not his willpower could hold on. The process of the magical yuan attacking the bones in his 5 fingers persisted for a long time. Han Shuo sat cross-legged, sweat pouring from his body like rain, the veins on his forehead pulsing. His originally peaceful expression now looked a bit sinister and sinister, giving off an incomparably evil feeling. After an unknown amount of time, just as Han Shuo felt that he was about to faint from the pain, he could no longer suppress the unforgettable pain in his hands. He couldn't help but let out a low roar and flung his hands out unconsciously. Pa pa pa, 10 crisp sounds rang out from his 10 fingers in succession. Han Shuo felt a bit exhausted from head to toe, but the magical yuan flowing to his fingers was finally unimpeded. 10 purplish-red flames danced on the fingertips of his 10 hands in an instant. 10 purplish-red flames shone with breathtaking beauty in the dark storeroom. They were like beautiful flowers that had suddenly bloomed, giving people a mysterious and unfathomable feeling. His palms, along with his 5 fingers, were dyed purplish-red. The bone patterns on his palms were abnormally clear, and even his skin and flesh shone with a crystalline luster. It was extremely strange. Overjoyed, Han Shuo couldn't help but let out a low growl. He looked left and right before slowly withdrawing the magical yuan that had flowed into his palms to his abdomen. Without the continuous influx of magical yuan, Han Shuo's hands gradually returned to normal. The 10 blooming flames also disappeared without a trace. Success, this was the result of successfully cultivating the mystical glacial spellfire. Although he was still unable to fully deploy the greatest power of the mystical glacial spellfire due to his weak magical yuan, based on his current accomplishments, Han Shuo was no longer an ordinary person without the ability to protect himself. The red flames of the mystical glacial spellfire burned everything, while the purple flames were bone-chillingly cold. If an ordinary person were to be touched by it, their internal organs would be burnt to a crisp or frozen into ice. There would be no hope of survival. When the magical yuan was strong enough, an even more ferocious and enormous purplish-red flame could be condensed in the palm of his hand and unleash a terrifying power. After successfully cultivating the mystical glacial spellfire, Han Shuo's body was drowned in a strong sense of exhaustion, and he fell into a deep sleep after a while. The next day, early morning, under Fanny's lead, a group of 12 gathered at the entrance to the town of Droll. They gathered some food and water from the town of Droll, and all of these items landed on Han Shuo's body in the end. "What were you doing in Master Fanny's room last night?" Lisa hung a leather bag of water on Han Shuo's body as she approached Han Shuo and asked in a low voice. It looked like Fanny hadn't told anyone about last night's events. Han Shuo glanced at Fanny from afar and discovered that Fanny was busily giving instructions to the students. He said to Lisa in a low voice, "Nothing much, Master Fanny just wanted to test some necromancy magic and used me as a test subject." "Huh, don't lie to me. Even if Master Fanny wanted you to test her magic, she wouldn't test the bone arrow spell. This spell is something that only magic apprentices need to grasp. With Fanny's strength as an adept mage, would she test this spell?" Lisa snorted delicately and looked warily at Han Shuo. Master Fanny was testing the bone arrow spell. It's just that each spell is divided into 5 levels. She just wanted to see what level she could use the bone arrow spell with her strength. You can ask Master Fanny if you don't believe me. Ever since Han Shuo had lied to Lisa, Lisa's attitude towards Han Shuo had indeed changed dramatically. However, women were like this. Even if they didn't like you, as long as they knew that you adored them, they would treat you as their personal property. If you had any ambiguous relationships with others, she would be the first to feel uncomfortable. Lisa was the same. Although Lisa wouldn't have any thoughts towards Han Shuo, after she understood Han Shuo's feelings, she naturally thought that Han Shuo should love her and only her until death, and shouldn't have any dealings with Fanny. Han Shuo had heard people say this before, and it seemed that there was some truth to it now. Forget it, you wouldn't dare lie to me anyway. Lisa looked at Fanny from afar and spoke lightly to Han Shuo, then left Han Shuo's side. Brian, let's go. The dark forest is lush with trees and shrubs, and the paths are uneven. We can't ride horses anymore, we can only enter on foot. You're carrying too many resources on you, you can't fall behind because there are many fierce magical creatures in the dark forest. It'd be terrible if you fall behind and are killed by them. Fanny looked at Han Shuo from afar and called out loudly. After yesterday's events, Fanny's attitude towards Han Shuo had changed imperceptibly. Now, Fanny seemed to favor Han Shuo even more, but her original gentle attitude towards Han Shuo no longer existed. She was a bit irritated and rude. I'm coming. Han Shuo had taken great advantage of Fanny yesterday, and she'd even seen his disgraceful behavior in her bathroom. It was only natural that Fanny would no longer be amiable. As long as Fanny slowly changed her attitude now, it would be a kind of progress. The town of Droll was abnormally busy during the day. All sorts of stores had opened early in the morning, and merchants and adventurers with sloppy eyes and disheveled clothing walked out from the nearby streets and alleys. These people had all started preparing for work after a night of debauchery. The merchants and adventurers gathered in groups of 3 to 5, carrying their belongings and setting out from the entrance of the town of Droll into the dark forest. They either went to the dark forest to capture magical creatures, or traded for resources with some of the rarer races in the dark forest. Under Fanny's incessant urging, Han Shuo's group of 12 packed up their belongings and followed Fanny and Jean's footsteps into the dark forest. The dark forest was vast and boundless. Not only were there all sorts of savage magical creatures within, but there were also some rare races. Elves, dwarves, goblins, and barbarians were the main races within the dark forest. However, even these races usually lived in the outer layers of the dark forest. The true inner layer of the dark forest was filled with all sorts of mysteries and dangers. Some of the largest and most terrifyingly powerful magical beasts lived in the inner layer of the dark forest. That was the most mysterious and attractive place in the dark forest. Although it was rumored that there were enormous treasures and precious items there, very few people dared to enter. Those who could enter and come out alive were even rarer. Follow me, we'll head south. Fanny called out loudly when they'd entered the dark forest and started leading the group in a different direction, heading directly south of the dark forest. The paths within the dark forest were indeed rugged. All sorts of hard rocks could be seen everywhere, and some towering trees more than 10 meters tall with lush foliage could be seen everywhere. Some weak and docile magical creatures on the way smartly hid when they saw strangers. In the beginning, there were many merchants and adventurers heading south as well, but as time progressed, they all identified their own directions and left. They'd all disappeared after a while, and no one knew where they'd gone. Suddenly, a few hurried footsteps fell into Han Shuo's ears. Han Shuo started and listened carefully. He couldn't help but say, "There's a sound approaching, it doesn't seem to be the footsteps of humans." "Brian, you're an errand slave. How can you hear danger?" "What a joke." Bach was the first to laugh loudly and mock Han Shuo. Ever since Han Shuo had started practicing magical yuan, his senses had become much clearer than before, and he had ample confidence in his ears. The sounds of rapid approach and the soft footsteps weren't something that a two-legged human could make, and it sounded like there was more than one of them. Han Shuo had understood the dangers of the dark forest from Fanny and the others, so he'd spoken up to warn them. However, Han Shuo didn't continue to argue when he realized that his words hadn't attracted the attention of the others. The group continued walking south slowly, but Fanny was the first to frown after 2 minutes. She exclaimed in surprise and said, "There are magical creatures approaching. Everyone put down your things and prepare for battle. We're only at the outermost perimeter of the dark forest and shouldn't be particularly strong magical creatures, so don't worry too much." The students all started when Fanny's words left her mouth. They looked askance at Han Shuo and hurriedly put down the things on their backs, forming a ring of defense. Chapter 33. Suddenly, 5 cat-like magical beasts with 3 heads, spikes on their tails, and pupils that shone with yellow light rushed out from the surroundings. "Don't worry too much, these are just barbtail cats. Everyone hurry up and attack. Let me test the effects of your necromancy magic." Fanny breathed a sigh of relief when she saw the magical creatures appear and called out daintily. As soon as Fanny's words fell, bone arrows rapidly took shape in the air as the students chanted their spells. Following the students' instructions, the bone arrows whooshed towards the 5 barb-tailed cats. Although the 5 barb-tailed cats were very fast, 3 of them were still hit by the bone arrows. Blood instantly blossomed on their brown skin, and their speed was immediately affected. But 2 of the first to rush over actually dodged the students' bone arrows and charged straight towards them. The students released the bone arrows in their panic, but they either deviated too far or exploded midway. They repeatedly made mistakes in their haste. The 2 barbtail cats were one on the left and one on the right. Fanny suddenly made her move when the one on the left was about to reach the defensive perimeter. She deployed the same bone arrow spell in her hands, and 3 bone arrows suddenly appeared in the air, landing accurately on the barbtail cat's 3 heads. 3 shrill, strange cries emitted from the barbtail cat's 3 heads. It didn't dare charge forward anymore, and instead hurriedly retreated in fear. The other barb-tailed cat was charging in Han Shuo's direction and had set its sights on Han Shuo. The students had been too anxious and had made a series of mistakes with their bone arrow magic. They hadn't been able to obstruct the barb-tailed cat at all. Jean had been so focused on Fanny that he'd momentarily forgotten about the threat on the right. He only reacted when Fanny had forced the barb-tailed cat back. But it was already a bit too late. The barb-tailed cat had charged directly in front of Han Shuo, and its 3 fanged heads and sharp claws attacked viciously at Han Shuo. "Watch out, Brian!" Fanny and Lisa cried out at the same time. Han Shuo's expression was calm when he saw that the barbtail cat was already within reach. He didn't panic at all, and the corners of his mouth even curved up in a cold, harsh smile. When the cat's claws and teeth were already in front of him, Han Shuo suddenly made a move with lightning speed. He waved his left hand, and the hard wooden sticks that he'd used as the tense support blocked the barbtail cat's claws. Immediately after, Han Shuo's empty right hand suddenly stabbed out. From afar, everyone saw that a bright red line seemed to streak through the air. Then, they saw Han Shuo's right hand land on the barb-tailed cat's lower abdomen, pausing for a moment before suddenly withdrawing it. At the same time, the 2 bone arrows that Jean had used to rescue finally landed on the barb-tailed cat's body, belatedly. 3 strange, mournful cries suddenly came from the barb-tailed cat's 3 heads. Then, with a thud, the barb-tailed cat fell powerlessly to the ground, never to move again. As the barb-tailed cat collapsed powerlessly, the 4 injured barb-tailed cats beside it seemed to be frightened. They screamed and hurriedly fled, disappearing without a trace in the blink of an eye. Master Jean's bone arrows are so powerful, they killed the barb-tailed cat in one go. The bone arrows that Master Fanny and I shot at the barb-tailed cat only injured it, they didn't have such great power. Amy exclaimed lightly and looked at Jean in surprise. The others also found it odd after Amy's words, and even Fanny looked at Jean in surprise. She said with some confusion, "The bone arrow spell is only the most basic attack spell. It's quite incredible that you could use this spell to kill a barb-tailed cat in one go." Jean's expression was also a bit odd at the start, and he seemed to be equally bewildered and puzzled. But after Fanny's words, Jean immediately revealed an exceedingly confident smile and nodded faintly at everyone, as if acknowledging the strength of his attack spell. Brian, when you hit the barbtail cat with your right hand just now, why did I seem to see a red line streak through the air? What's going on? Although Master Jean killed the barbtail cat, it seems that it was because of your hit that the cat became unsteady, is that right? Lisa had been paying attention to Han Shua's side all this time. She thought for a moment and felt that it was a bit odd. Heh, Lisa, don't let your imagination run wild. Brian did hit the barbtail cat, but his hit didn't have any effect at all. What harm could an errand slave like him do to the barbtail cat? Bach looked disdainfully at Han Shua and spoke mockingly. Han Shua smiled dumbly and didn't say much. However, some of the other students also looked at Han Shua with some confusion when they saw what had just happened. But afterwards, they all assumed that Han Shua hadn't played any role, and that the barbtail cat's tragic death was entirely caused by Jean. After all, in their hearts, Han Shua was just an errand slave that could be bullied at will. How could an errand slave have such great strength and methods? Alright, let's get out of here. The barbtail cat is a magical creature that bullies the weak and fears the strong. However, these magical creatures live in groups, and if they find help, it will bring some trouble. This kind of low-level magical creature has no magical core and its flesh isn't worth much. Let's ignore it and leave this place as soon as possible. Fanny didn't seem to pay much attention to Jean after a moment of surprise. She called out to the others to pick up the things they had put down and hurried on their way. This made Jean quite disappointed. He had thought that Fanny would look at him in a different light. The group of 12 packed up their things again under Fanny's orders and continued on their way south. Han Shua was the last to leave. He had a strange smile on his face as he looked at the 2 wounds that Jean's bone arrows had struck the barbtail cat. At this moment, 2 charred smells slowly emanated from the 2 wounds. From the wounds, one could see that the barbtail cat's flesh had already been charred black. The barbtail cat's death had been caused by the red spellfire of the mystical glacial spellfire that Han Shua had injected into its body with his right hand. It had nothing to do with Jean at all. He looked at his right hand and circulated his magical yuan. A fiery red spellfire suddenly blossomed from the tip of his middle finger. Han Shua exclaimed in admiration at the terrifying power of the mystical glacial spellfire as he looked at the fiery red spellfire. He chuckled lightly and quickly caught up to Fanny and the others. It was night, and the bright moonlight passed through the lush foliage of the large trees and sprinkled onto every corner of the dark forest. Some unknown insects crooned lowly, bringing a few cheerful sounds to the quiet forest. The bonfire was bright red, causing a warm air to spread out in the somewhat cool night. Han Shua picked up a few wooden sticks that were hung with fresh meat and continuously stirred them above the hot bonfire. As some condiments were sprinkled onto the red and glossy roasted meat, waves of tempting meat fragrance wafted into the necromancy major students' noses and mouths. It smells so good. Brian, who would have thought that you knew how to make this? Lisa wrinkled her cute, straight nose as her eyes landed on the glossy meat that Han Shua had picked up. She exclaimed in surprise. Your performance against the barbtail cat today was truly too disappointing. You couldn't even properly deploy the most basic bone arrow magic when you panicked. This won't do. And you, Master Jean, although the attack power of your bone arrow at the end was amazing, you were too careless earlier. If it wasn't for Brian's early vigilance, he would have been injured by the barbtail cat. The students gathered around the bonfire. Fanny's brows furrowed slightly as she loudly admonished the crowd. She seemed to be very dissatisfied with the performance of the students and Jean today. The students all had faces full of subservience and seemed to be listening very attentively. However, their gazes would wander to Han Shua's roasted meat from time to time, and the sounds of saliva being swallowed could be heard from some of their mouths. Han Shua had been a full-time otaku in the past, and he usually took care of his own food and drinks. His culinary skills were very effective. The development of food in this world was far from that of Han Shua's era. Now that he had displayed a little of his cooking skills, it immediately made these people salivate. Han Shuo involuntarily sized up Fanny as he listened to Fanny's admonishment. He was startled by Fanny's imposing manner and thought to himself that Fanny was the true person in charge of this operation. Within the necromancy major, it seemed that even Jean, as a teacher, had a lower position than her. It was no wonder that Jean was a bit afraid of Fanny. It looked like it wasn't as simple as Jean's undying love for Fanny. Alright, that's all for now. We'll encounter even more danger later on, so I hope you won't be so careless again. Let's start eating the roasted meat. Fanny lectured everyone for a while, and she herself couldn't stand the aroma of Han Shuo's roasted meat any longer. She'd walked the entire day today, and had only eaten simple bread and water before. Now that there was suddenly such a delicacy, her stomach was the first to react. Master Fanny, this is yours. Lisa, this is yours. Bella, Bakjin, these are yours. Han Shuo had a strange smile on his face as he distributed the roasted meat to everyone. Brian, you're really something. This roasted meat is really delicious. Fanny even licked her red lips after eating a piece, and praised continuously. Her beauty that stirred one's imagination caused Han Shuo's heart to flutter. Not bad, it's too delicious. Brian really does have some skill. Lisa was also full of smiles as she exclaimed in admiration. She'd already finished more than half of the large piece of roasted meat in the blink of an eye. What rotten meat! It's so disgusting it's not even cooked. Boo-hoo, it's really disgusting, there's no taste at all. Damned Brian, you're doing this on purpose, this meat is still raw. Bak, Jean, Bella, and a few others who held grudges against Han Shuo all cursed the disgusting taste after taking a few bites. Han Shuo had an innocent expression on his face as he smiled foolishly. Some might really not be cooked yet. I'm sorry, your luck is a bit bad. Welcome to Immortal Cultivation Audiobooks, your gateway to the mystical world of Xianxia. Dive into legendary tales of martial arts, spiritual growth, and immortal ascension. Here, we bring you full-length English audiobooks of the best Wuxia and Xianxia stories, from young prodigies to ancient sect wars. Perfect for fans of Against the Gods, Martial World, and tales of demons and gods.